The sun, a relentless molten orb, beat down on the sprawling, parched landscape of the Miller Ranch. Dust, fine and pervasive, coated everything. The weathered clapboard of the farmhouse, the thirsty scrub brush clinging to the arid soil, and the very air that horses and men alike breathed. It was the kind of heat that baked the earth into a cracked mosaic, a heat that seemed to drain the life from everything it touched. Yet within this stark beauty, life persisted, a testament to the resilience of those who called this unforgiving land home. Jedediah Miller, a man whose face was a roadmap of the 70 years he'd weathered, squinted at the horizon. His hands, gnarled as ancient oak branches, tightened on the worn reins of his chestnut mare. Each line etched into his skin spoke of sun-scorched days, freezing nights, and the constant gnawing worry that was the lifeblood of any rancher in the American West. He wasn't a man for flowery words or grand pronouncements. His language was spoken in the furrow of his brow, the set of his jaw, and the steady, unwavering gaze that missed little. Beside him, astride a smaller, more spirited pinto, was his grandson, Billy. 10 years old and brimming with a restless energy that the vastness of the ranch couldn't quite contain, Billy was a whirlwind of questions and untamed curiosity. His eyes, wide and blue like a summer sky, darted from the distant buttes to the circling hawks overhead, absorbing every detail with an intensity that belied his young age. But beneath the surface of youthful exuberance, a shadow had fallen. The absence of his mother, taken by a swift and brutal fever the previous spring, still echoed in the silent spaces of the farmhouse, a void that Billy, in his own way, struggled to fill. "Look, Gramps," Billy exclaimed, pointing a dirt-stained finger towards a distant herd of cattle. "Think they're ours?" Jedediah followed his gaze, a faint smile touching the corners of his lips. "Most likely, son, though some strays wander in from the Double Bar Ranch now and then. We'll sort 'em out come round up." His voice was a low rumble, a sound as much a part of the prairie as the wind. They rode in comfortable silence for a spell, the only sounds the rhythmic creak of saddle leather, the soft thud of hooves on dry earth, and the occasional jingle of harness. It was a silence born not of awkwardness, but of shared understanding. Jedediah had always been a man of few words, and Billy, ever since his mother's passing, had become more withdrawn, his boisterous chatter replaced by a thoughtful quietude that Jedediah found both concerning and, in a strange way, mature. As they neared the western boundary of their land, a distinct landmark rose from the otherwise undulating terrain, a derelict, stone-lined well. It was old, predating Jedediah's own claim by decades, and it had been dry for as long as anyone could remember, yet it held a certain ominous presence, a dark mouth gaping in the earth, and it was a place Jedediah had repeatedly warned Billy to avoid. "You stay clear of that old well, Billy," Jedediah had said countless times, his voice firm, his eyes serious. "Ain't nothing good up there. Just trouble waiting to happen." Billy, however, possessed a mind that often chafed against stern directives, especially when the reasons remained shrouded in vague warnings. He understood danger. He understood fences that needed mending and horses that needed shoeing, but the mystique of the forbidden drew him in. The well in its silent skeletal state seemed to whisper secrets, and Billy, a boy adrift in a world that suddenly felt too large and too quiet, was eager to listen. Today, as they rode closer, Billy's gaze lingered on the well. The rough-hewn stones, bleached by sun and wind, seemed to hold a history of their own. He imagined the people who had dug it, the water it must have once yielded, and the stories it could tell if only it could speak. A shiver, not entirely of cold, traced its way down his spine. Jedediah, sensing his grandson's attention drawn to the forbidden spot, cleared his throat. "Best we head back now, Billy. Sun's getting low, and Maria's likely got supper on the table." Billy nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the well for a moment longer. He felt a pull, a subtle magnetism that he couldn't quite explain. It was a feeling that both thrilled and frightened him, a knot of curiosity tightening in his stomach. He knew he shouldn't, but the temptation was a whisper in his ear, a dare in the vast silence of the prairie. He would remember that feeling, the unspoken pull, the lingering gaze in the days to come, a silent harbinger of the events that would soon unfold. The air in the bunkhouse was thick with the scent of sweat, stale coffee, and pipe tobacco. It was a rough-and-tumble haven for the ranch hands, a place where weary bodies found rest and men, far from the comforts of civilization, found camaraderie. Lamplight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, illuminating faces weathered by sun and hardship, men who had seen more than their fair share of life's rough edges. Jedediah entered, his spurs jingling softly on the wooden floor. He was a man who commanded respect not through bluster, but through quiet competence and a lifetime of hard work. The hands, a mix of grizzled veterans and eager young men, paused their card games and conversations, their eyes turning towards the rancher. "Evening, Jedediah," grunted Silas, a burly man with a beard as untamed as the prairie itself, his voice a low drawl. He was Jedediah's most trusted foreman, a man as loyal as he was strong. "Silas," Jedediah acknowledged, nodding curtly. He surveyed the room, his gaze settling on a group hunched over a game of poker. The stakes were usually low, coins, tobacco, or the unspoken agreement to do an extra chore, but the tension, the sharp intake of breath with each card dealt, was always palpable. Billy, who had followed his grandfather in, stood near the doorway, a small, observant figure in the midst of these rough men. He found the bunkhouse a place of endless fascination. It was a world away from the quiet, often somber atmosphere of the farmhouse, a place filled with stories and laughter, even if some of it was rough around the edges. He loved listening to their tales of cattle drives, close calls with rustlers, and encounters with wildlife that seemed larger than life. "Heard you took young Billy out towards the North Range today, Jedediah," said a younger hand, a lanky fellow named Cody, his eyes sharp and quick. "Anything interesting out that way?" Jedediah settled onto a worn stool, picking up a piece of kindling to examine. "Just checking fences, Cody, and keeping an eye on the herd." He paused, his gaze drifting towards Billy, who was now watching a spider spin its web in a dusty corner. "And making sure certain young fellas stay away from places they shouldn't ought to be." A knowing chuckle rippled through the room. They all knew about the old well. Jedediah's warnings were legendary, whispered around campfires and over shared meals. Some of the men, new to the ranch, saw it as an old man's superstition. Others, those who had been there longer, understood that Jedediah's caution, however gruff, was usually born of hard-won experience. "That old well," Silas mused, running a hand over his beard, "always did give me an uneasy feeling, like the ground itself was holding its breath around it." "Hey, it's just an old hole in the ground, Silas," scoffed a newcomer, a brash young man named Wade who had only been with the ranch for a few months, probably dried up faster than a politician's promise. Jedediah's eyes, usually calm, flickered towards Wade. "Some holes run deeper than you can see, Wade, and some warnings are worth heeding." His tone was quiet, but carried an unmistakable weight. Wade, sensing he had overstepped, bit back any further comment, focusing his attention back on his cards. Billy, however, was listening intently. He felt a thrill run through him. The men's words, their shared unease, only amplified the intrigue surrounding the well. He imagined Jedediah's warnings as a challenge, a test of bravery that he, Billy, was more than ready to face. He tried to picture the well in his mind, its dark opening, the rough stones, the supposed secrets it held. Maria, Jedediah's wife and Billy's grandmother, appeared at the doorway, a sturdy woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She carried a steaming pot of stew. "Jedediah, Silas, gentlemen," she said, her voice warm but firm. "Supper's ready. No sense letting good food go to waste." The men rose, their faces softening as they moved towards the smell of Maria's cooking. They were a motley crew, but they were Jedediah's crew, and they all understood the unspoken bond that tied them to this ranch. Billy stayed close to his grandfather, his thoughts still swirling around the stories and the warnings. He felt a growing sense of unease, a premonition that something was shifting, that the quiet routine of their lives was about to be disrupted. As they ate, the conversation turned to the upcoming cattle drive, the challenges of the season, and the latest gossip from the nearest town, a dusty settlement miles away. Billy ate slowly, his mind replaying his grandfather's words, the men's hushed tones, and the image of the old well. The dust outside seemed to settle deeper, the silence of the prairie more profound. A seed of a dangerous idea was beginning to take root in Billy's young mind, nurtured by curiosity, grief, and the lingering allure of the forbidden. The farmhouse, usually a place of warmth and hushed activity, now carried the palpable weight of absence. Maria moved through the rooms with a quiet efficiency, her movements almost ritualistic. Each chore, tending the meager garden, mending clothes, preparing meals, was performed with a practiced grace, a way of keeping the encroaching grief at bay. But in the stolen moments, when her gaze fell upon an empty chair or a forgotten toy, the mask of stoicism would falter. Billy, sensing his grandmother's quiet sorrow, often found himself drawn to her side. He would sit with her on the porch swing, the gentle creak of the chains, a somber rhythm to their unspoken grief. He missed his mother's laughter, her gentle touch, the way she could make even the most mundane chore feel like an adventure. The world, once vibrant and full of color, now seemed muted, tinged with the gray of loss. Jedediah, too, felt the void. He was a man of the land, his emotions as deeply buried as the roots of the hardy prairie grass. He showed his love through actions, not words, ensuring the roof was sound, the fences strong, and the pantry full. But the silence of his daughter-in-law's voice, the absence of her quick wit and comforting presence, had carved a hollow in his heart. He found himself watching Billy more closely, a paternal anxiety growing with each passing day. He saw the boy's quietness, the way his eyes often held a faraway look, and he worried. One sweltering afternoon, Maria sat on the porch, darning a sock. Billy, restless, lay on his stomach in the dust, drawing patterns with a stick. The silence between them stretched thick and heavy. "Grandma," Billy began, his voice soft, hesitant. Do you miss her too?" Maria's needle stilled. She looked at her grandson, her heart aching. "Every single day, Billy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Some days it feels like a part of me is missing too." Billy traced a line in the dust, a small, shaky tremor in his hand. I don't understand why she had to go. It wasn't fair." Maria put down her mending and pulled Billy into her arms. He was growing so fast, his small frame becoming lankier, his shoulders broader. She held him tightly, feeling the tremors that ran through him. "Life out here. It's not always fair, Billy," she said, her voice rough. "It's beautiful and it's strong, but it's also hard. We just have to find a way to keep going, to hold on to the good memories and let them guide us." She pulled back, wiping a tear from her own cheek. "Your mother loved you more than anything. She wouldn't want you to be sad all the time." Billy nodded, though the words offered little solace. He felt a deep well of anger and confusion churning within him. Anger at the unfairness of it all, confusion about a world that could snatch away the people you loved without a reason. He longed for something to fill the emptiness, something that could make him feel whole again. Jedediah, watching them from the doorway, felt a familiar ache in his chest. He wasn't good with words of comfort, but he understood the language of shared hardship. He knew that grief, like a drought, could wither a spirit. He saw the subtle ways it was affecting Billy, the way the boy's natural exuberance seemed to be dimming. He wished he could shield his grandson from it all, but the West, he knew, offered no such protection. Later that evening, as Jedediah sat by the dying embers of the fire, he looked at Billy, who was poring over an old, faded photograph of his mother. The boy's brow was furrowed in concentration, as if trying to memorize every detail. Jedediah knew he had to do something, to find a way to rekindle the spark in his grandson. He had always relied on routine, on the predictable rhythm of ranch life to keep things grounded. But grief was an unpredictable force, capable of upending the most carefully laid plans. He thought of the old well, a place that had always seemed to hold a certain unsettling mystique. He had warned Billy away from it countless times, a stern admonishment born of a vague sense of unease. Perhaps, he mused, it was time to confront that unease, to understand what drew Billy to it. He knew deep down that he couldn't simply forbid Billy from exploring his own emotions, his own questions. The weight of absence was a heavy burden for a child to carry alone. The days bled into one another, marked by the rhythm of the ranch, the pre-dawn stirrings, the strenuous labor under the vast sky, the weary return to the farmhouse, and the quiet, reflective evenings. Billy, however, found himself increasingly drawn to the fringes of his world, his thoughts often drifting to the abandoned well. It had become a silent companion in his grief, a focal point for his burgeoning sense of independence and his unspoken need to understand the mysteries that life had presented him. Jedediah, though outwardly stoic, observed his grandson's growing preoccupation with a watchful eye. He saw the way Billy's gaze would often linger towards the western pasture, the direction of the well. He understood that a boy grappling with loss needed an outlet, a distraction, perhaps even a challenge. But there was something about it that unsettled him, a lingering disquiet he couldn't quite articulate. He had inherited the ranch from his own father, and the well had always been there, a relic of a time before him, a place whispered about with a superstitious dread. One sweltering afternoon, while Jedediah was out mending a section of fence on the far side of the ranch, Billy found himself alone. Maria was inside, preparing their midday meal. The sun was high, the air shimmering with heat. The usual calls of ranch hands were distant, the rhythmic clang of hammer on metal barely audible. It was a perfect opportunity. A prickle of apprehension mixed with a surge of determination ran through Billy. He knew his grandfather's warnings, the stern tone in his voice, but the image of the well, its dark, silent maw, was a persistent siren call. He told himself it was just a quick look, nothing more. He wanted to see it up close, to understand why it was so feared. He mounted his pinto, a sturdy mare that was more accustomed to his gentle handling than the rougher touch of the ranch hands. He rode slowly at first, his heart thumping against his ribs like a trapped bird. The familiar landscape seemed to take on a new, more menacing aspect as he ventured further from the farmhouse, closer to the edge of their known world. As he approached the well, the air grew strangely still. Even the incessant drone of insects seemed to quieten. The well itself stood stark against the bleached earth, a circle of rough-hewn stones choked with weeds and thyme. It was larger than he had imagined, its depth an unnerving mystery. He dismounted, his boots crunching on loose pebbles. He walked to the edge, his knees trembling slightly. He peered over. Darkness. Absolute, impenetrable darkness. He couldn't see the bottom, couldn't discern any features within the abyss. It was like looking into another world, a world that held its secrets close. He felt a strange sensation, a dizzying pull, as if the darkness were trying to draw him in. He reached out a tentative hand, his fingers brushing against the rough, cool stone of the well's rim. He imagined the countless hands that had touched this same stone over the years, their hopes, their fears, their stories lost to time. He felt a profound sense of solitude, a connection to the past that both awed and frightened him. He picked up a small stone and, with a deep breath, tossed it into the darkness. He waited, straining his ears. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, faintly, he heard it, a soft, hollow plink. It was the sound of the stone hitting water, water impossibly deep within the earth. A shiver ran down his spine, a mixture of excitement and fear. He leaned further over the edge, mesmerized by the sound, by the thought of the hidden water. He wanted to see it, to know for sure. It was then that he heard a shout, a voice sharp with alarm, cutting through the stillness. "Billy, stay away from that well!" It was Jedediah. He had returned to the ranch earlier than expected and had seen Billy heading towards the forbidden spot. He spurred his mare forward, his heart in his throat. Billy froze, his body rigid. He looked back, seeing his grandfather riding towards him with a look of mingled fear and anger on his face. The stern warnings, the implicit danger, all came crashing down on him. He was caught. But in that moment of panic, as Jedediah's urgent cry echoed in his ears, Billy's foot slipped on the loose gravel at the edge of the well. His arms flailed, desperately seeking purchase, but found none. His body pitched forward, a guttural cry escaping his lips as he tumbled into the gaping maw of the earth. The last thing he saw was the sun-drenched sky, rapidly shrinking, replaced by an all-consuming darkness. The sudden, sharp cry ripped through the otherwise tranquil afternoon, a sound of pure terror that instantly galvanized Jedediah. It was Billy's voice, and it was laced with a panic that chilled him to the bone. He spurred his mare, the animal's powerful legs churning up dust as they galloped towards the dreaded landmark. His mind raced, a chaotic jumble of fear and regret. He had warned the boy countless times, but the pull of the forbidden, the careless curiosity of youth, had always been a potent force. As he drew closer, his heart hammered against his ribs. He saw Billy's pinto standing riderless near the edge of the old well, and then he saw it, the small overturned figure of his grandson, his legs kicking feebly in the air, his small body half in, half out of the dark opening. The image seared itself into his mind. Yet the boy leaned over, trembling. "Billy!" Jedediah's voice was a desperate roar, raw with anguish. He reined in his mare sharply, dismounting in a single, fluid motion. His weathered hands, usually so steady, trembled as he rushed to the edge. The sight that greeted him was horrifying. Billy had fallen, his legs dangling precariously, his upper body disappearing into the blackness of the well. The boy was clearly struggling, his small hands scrabbling for purchase on the slick, moss-covered stones. "Hold on, son! Hold on!" Jedediah yelled, his voice strained. He dropped to his hands and knees, peering into the abyss. He couldn't see Billy's face, only the frantic kicking of his legs. He could hear the boy's ragged breaths, punctuated by whimpers of fear. "Gramps!" I slipped. Billy's voice was muffled, a terrified rasp from the depths. Jedediah's mind worked with a speed that belied his years. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. He had to act. He scanned the area, his eyes darting wildly. He needed rope, something strong. He remembered a coil of sturdy hemp rope stored in the tack shed, but it was a good 100 yards away, and every second counted. "Don't you move, Billy. Don't you let go," Jedediah commanded, his voice as firm as he could make it, though his insides churned with fear. He looked at the well's opening. It was narrow, but the stones were loose, treacherous. He couldn't simply reach in and pull Billy out. It was too precarious, too dangerous. He turned and sprinted towards the tack shed, his spurs digging into the dry earth. He could hear Billy's whimpers growing weaker, the sounds of his struggle becoming more desperate. Jedediah's lungs burned, his legs pumped with a primal urgency. He burst into the shed, his eyes scanning the cluttered space. There, hanging on a peg, was the coil of thick rope. He snatched it, testing its strength with a yank. It would have to do. He raced back to the well, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Billy was still there, his small body clinging precariously to the edge. Jedediah didn't hesitate. He secured one end of the rope to the sturdy hitching post near the well, tying a knot he'd learned as a boy, a knot that wouldn't slip. "All right, Billy," he called out, his voice strained. "I'm gonna lower this down to you. You gotta grab hold. Can you do that?" There was a moment of silence, then a weak, "Yes, Gramps." Jedediah slowly, carefully, lowered the rope into the well. He watched, his eyes fixed on the dangling end, praying that Billy could reach it, could grip it with his small, trembling hands. He saw Billy's fingers, pale and smudged with dirt, reach out, fumbling. For a heart-stopping moment, they seemed to miss. Then a gasp, and the rope was clutched tight. "Got it, Gramps. I got it," Billy cried, his voice filled with a desperate hope. "Good boy. Now, pull yourself up as much as you can. I'm gonna pull you out." Jedediah braced himself, planting his feet firmly, and began to haul on the rope. He could feel the weight of his grandson, the desperate struggle against gravity and fear. The stones around the edge of the well seemed to crumble slightly under the strain. He gritted his teeth, his muscles screaming, his focus solely on that rope, on the small life at the other end. The fate of his grandson hung in the balance, suspended by a simple coil of hemp and the sheer will of an old rancher. Jedediah's strained breaths filled the tense silence surrounding the well, each pull on the rope a testament to his dwindling strength and mounting desperation. Billy, though clinging to the rope with all his might, was a dead weight, his small body exhausted and chilled by the damp air rising from the well's depths. The rough stones of the well's lip offered little purchase, threatening to dislodge with every movement. Jedediah knew he couldn't do this alone. His own strength was fading, and the sheer terror in Billy's cries was a constant agonizing reminder of the peril they were in. He scanned the horizon, his eyes desperate. The ranch house was too far, and Maria, though capable, wouldn't be able to provide the immediate physical aid needed. He needed help, strong, capable hands, and he needed them now. His gaze swept across the undulating prairie, searching for any sign of movement, any sign of another living soul. Then, in the distance, a faint plume of dust rose against the pale blue sky. It was coming from the direction of the neighboring ranches, specifically the territory of the Hendersons. The Hendersons. A pang of bitterness, a cold reminder of old feuds and bitter disputes over water rights and stray cattle, tightened Jedediah's chest. He and Old Man Henderson had a history, a long, tangled history of mistrust and animosity. But today, that history seemed as dry and irrelevant as the cracked earth beneath his boots. Billy's life was the only currency that mattered. "Billy, I gotta go get help, son," Jedediah yelled, his voice hoarse. "You gotta hold on. You hear me? Just hold on." Billy whimpered, his grip tightening on the rope. "Don't leave me, Gramps." "I ain't leaving you, son. I'm getting help. You gotta be brave. Just a little while longer." Jedediah gave the rope a final secure wrap around the hitching post, ensuring it wouldn't slip. He gave Billy's dangling feet a reassuring, though trembling, pat. Then, without another word, he turned and remounted his mare, urging her into a gallop towards the rising dust cloud. The ride felt agonizingly long. Every hoofbeat seemed to mock his haste. He imagined the worst, his mind conjuring images of Billy's grip weakening, of the rope fraying, of the dark water claiming his grandson. He rode with a grim determination, the old animosity towards the Hendersons pushed aside by the overwhelming urgency of the situation. As he drew closer, he could make out the figures of two men on horseback, their horses lathered. They were Silas Henderson, a man almost as rough and unyielding as Jedediah himself, and his son Caleb, a younger man with a reputation for a quick temper and even quicker draw. Jedediah pulled his mare up short, raising a hand to halt their approach. "Henderson!" Jedediah bellowed, his voice cracking with strain. "I need your help." Silas Henderson reined in his horse, his expression one of surprise and suspicion. He had not spoken to Jedediah Miller in years, not since the infamous fence dispute that had nearly led to bloodshed. "Jedediah, what in tarnation are you yelling about? It's Billy, my grandson!" Jedediah's words tumbled out in a rush. He fell down the old well. He's dangled there for minutes. I got him on a rope, but I can't pull him out alone." Caleb Henderson's eyes widened, his usual swagger replaced by a look of concern. Silas, though his face remained impassive, could see the genuine desperation in Jedediah's eyes. The years of animosity, the petty grievances, dissolved in the face of a child's life hanging in the balance. "The old Miller well?" Silas asked, his voice losing some of its gruffness. "That dry hole out by the north pasture?" "It ain't dry, Silas," Jedediah choked out. "It's deep, and he's down there now." Silas exchanged a quick glance with his son. Then, without further hesitation, he nodded. "We'll help. Lead the way, Jedediah." A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled Jedediah's knees, washed over him. He turned his mare, signaling for them to follow, and set off at a brisk pace back towards the well. The sight of the Henderson riders, silhouetted against the vast western sky, was an unexpected yet welcome beacon of hope. An unlikely alliance, forged in the crucible of crisis, was galloping across the prairie, racing against time and the unforgiving depths of a forgotten well. The arrival of Silas and Caleb Henderson at the well was a moment charged with unspoken tension. The years of animosity between the two ranching families hung in the air, thick and heavy as the prairie dust. Yet the desperate situation had rendered it impotent. Silas, a man forged in the same hard crucible of the West, understood the immediate, undeniable duty to a neighbor in peril. Caleb, though younger and less burdened by past grudges, possessed a keen eye and a quick mind, qualities that would soon prove invaluable. Jedediah, his face etched with exhaustion and worry, quickly explained the precarious situation. Billy was still clinging to the rope, his small voice a faint whimpering sound that periodically reached their ears. The rope was secured, but the strain on Jedediah's makeshift anchor was evident. "We need to get him out and fast," Silas stated, his voice calm and authoritative, cutting through the lingering tension. "Caleb, you got that strong rope from the barn?" Caleb nodded, already dismounting and pulling a coil of thicker, more reliable rope from his saddlebag. "Aye, Pa. It's good, sturdy stuff. Should hold." "Jedediah, you keep a steady tension on that rope," Silas instructed, his gaze fixed on the well. "Caleb and I will go down. We'll tie him securely, and we'll haul him up together." Jedediah, though loath to let go of the rope, knew Silas was right. He could no longer manage the task alone, and the additional hands were crucial. He gave the rope a final secure knot around the hitching post, his knuckles white. "Be careful, Silas. The stones are loose." Silas nodded grimly. He and Caleb began to expertly rig their stronger rope, creating a secure harness that could be lowered into the well. They worked with a practiced efficiency, their movements synchronized, a silent language of shared labor. Caleb, being lighter and more agile, volunteered to be the first one lowered. "All right, Jedediah," Silas said, his eyes meeting Jedediah's. "When Caleb gives the word, you and I will pull. Keep a steady rhythm. Don't rush it." Jedediah could only nod, his throat tight. He watched as Caleb, secured by Silas, began his descent into the darkness. The rope paid out smoothly, Caleb disappearing inch by agonizing inch into the well's maw. The sounds of his movements, the scrape of boots against stone, the occasional grunt of effort, were amplified in the confined space. "Billy, you hear me?" Caleb's voice echoed up from the depths. "It's Caleb Henderson. I'm coming down to get you." Billy's whimpers intensified, a mixture of fear and relief. "Caleb, is that you?" "It's me, kid. Hold tight. Don't let go of that rope." Caleb's voice was reassuring, a calming presence in the terrifying darkness. Jedediah and Silas stood at the edge, their hands gripping the rope, their eyes fixed on the opening. The tension was almost unbearable. They could hear Caleb's progress, his steady reassurances to Billy. Finally, Silas spoke. "He's reached him, Jedediah. We'll start the pull when he says." They waited, the seconds stretching into an eternity. Then Caleb's voice, strained but clear, floated up. "All right, Jedediah. Silas, ready when you are. Got him secured." Jedediah and Silas gripped the rope, their muscles tensing. "Heave!" Silas commanded. Together they began to pull. It was a slow, arduous process. The weight of 2 men plus Billy was immense. Their boots slipped on the dry earth, their backs ached, but they pulled with a desperate strength born of a shared purpose. They could hear Billy's frightened gasps, Caleb's steady encouragement, and the grating sound of stone against rope as Billy was slowly, painstakingly, drawn upwards. Jedediah's eyes met Silas's for a brief moment, a flicker of understanding passing between them. The old animosities were momentarily forgotten, replaced by the primal shared instinct to save a life. They were no longer rivals, but simply 2 men, united against the darkness. The descent for Caleb had been treacherous. The ascent for all of them was going to be an even greater test of their resilience. The rhythmic heaving of Jedediah and Silas on the rope was a desperate symphony against the vast silence of the prairie. Each pull was a small victory. Each centimeter gained a testament to their combined strength and unwavering resolve. Billy, though secured and coached by Caleb, was a trembling mass of fear and exhaustion. His small hands, still clamped around the rope, ached with a bone-deep fatigue. Caleb, positioned below Billy, provided crucial support, murmuring words of encouragement and helping to guide the boy's movements. He could feel the boy's small body shuddering, the desperate, shallow breaths he took. "Almost there, Billy," Caleb whispered, his voice strained. "Just keep holding on. You're doing great." As Billy's head began to emerge from the well's dark opening, Jedediah's heart surged with a desperate hope. He could see the boy's pale, dirt-streaked face, his wide, terrified eyes. But the well's lip, loose and unstable, proved to be the greatest obstacle. As Billy's shoulders cleared the opening, a cascade of stones shifted, threatening to send the boy plummeting back into the abyss. "Careful!" Silas roared, his voice a sharp crack of alarm. Jedediah and Silas instinctively tightened their grip, their bodies bracing against the sudden, jarring shift. Silas, with surprising agility for his size, moved closer to the edge, his powerful hands reaching out. Jedediah, his own strength waning, focused on maintaining the pull. "Caleb, get him over the edge," Silas commanded, his eyes fixed on Billy's dangling legs. Caleb, his own muscles screaming, pushed and heaved, trying to maneuver Billy away from the treacherous stones and towards the relative safety of the open ground. It was a delicate, dangerous dance, a fight against gravity and the crumbling earth. Jedediah felt a searing pain in his shoulder as he strained to keep the rope taut. Finally, with a surge of combined effort, Billy was pulled clear of the well's rim. He tumbled onto the ground, gasping for air, still clutched to Caleb. Jedediah, his legs trembling, let go of the rope, stumbling back. Silas rushed forward, his rough hands gently checking Billy over. "Are you hurt, boy?" Silas asked, his voice surprisingly tender. Billy, tears streaming down his dirt-caked face, could only shake his head, his small body racked with sobs. He burrowed into Caleb's embrace, the warmth of another human being, a stark contrast to the chilling darkness he had just escaped. Jedediah sank to his knees beside his grandson, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He reached out, his hand shaking, and gently cupped Billy's cheek. The boy looked up at him, his eyes wide and still filled with terror, but also with a dawning relief. "Gramps," Billy whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's all right, son. You're safe now. You're safe." Jedediah's voice was thick with emotion. He pulled Billy into a fierce embrace, holding him as tightly as he dared. as if trying to absorb the boy's fear into his own weary frame. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, a humbling realization that in his moment of dire need, help had come from the most unexpected of quarters. Silas Henderson stood watching them, his weathered face impassive, yet a flicker of something akin to respect in his eyes as he glanced at Jedediah. Caleb, still holding Billy, met Jedediah's gaze and offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The immediate crisis had passed, but the implications of this shared ordeal, the fragile truce forged in the face of disaster, were just beginning to unfold. The rescue, though successful, had been a harrowing ordeal, a stark reminder of the ever-present dangers that lurked in the unforgiving landscape of the West. The adrenaline that had fueled Jedediah's desperate actions began to ebb, leaving behind a profound exhaustion that settled deep into his bones. He held Billy close, the boy's small body now limp against his, the initial shock slowly giving way to a deep, tremulous weariness. Billy's sobs had subsided into quiet sniffles, his face buried in his grandfather's worn shirt. The rough, calloused hands that had so recently fought to keep his grandson from slipping into the abyss now gently stroked his hair. Silas Henderson, his expression serious, knelt beside them. "He's a lucky boy, Jedediah. Mighty lucky." His gaze swept over the well, a dark scar on the landscape, then back to the small, trembling figure in Jedediah's arms. "That rope of yours held, but it was a close thing." Caleb, his young face streaked with dirt and concern, offered Billy a piece of dried jerky he'd found in his saddlebag. Billy, after a hesitant glance at his grandfather, took it with a shaky hand, nibbling at it slowly. The simple act of nourishment, of taking sustenance, was a small yet significant step back towards normalcy. "Maria will be worried sick," Silas added, his voice pragmatic. "We should get back to the house." Jedediah nodded, his gaze still fixed on Billy. "You two, I don't know how to thank you." He met Silas's eyes, the years of animosity feeling like a distant, fading memory. "You came when I needed you. That counts for more than any old grudge." Silas gave a curt nod, a silent acknowledgement of the shared experience. "We're neighbors, Jedediah. That's what matters out here." He glanced at Caleb, a hint of pride in his eyes. "Caleb, help me get Billy onto your horse. Jedediah, you ride your own." With gentle hands, Caleb lifted Billy onto his mare, settling him carefully in front of him. Billy, still clinging to Caleb's front, looked back at Jedediah, his eyes wide and trusting. Jedediah mounted his mare, the familiar ache in his joints more pronounced than usual. The ride back to the farmhouse was a quiet one. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the prairie. The wind, which had been a gentle breeze earlier, now picked up, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and dry earth. Jedediah rode close to Caleb's horse, his eyes never leaving Billy. He could feel the lingering tremor in the boy's small body, the residual fear of the darkness he had faced. As they neared the farmhouse, Maria appeared on the porch, her face a mask of worry that transformed into relief at the sight of them. She rushed forward as they approached, her eyes immediately finding Billy. "Billy, oh my heavens!" she cried, hurrying to Caleb's horse. She helped lift Billy down, her hands trembling as she embraced him tightly. "What happened? Jedediah, what happened?" Jedediah dismounted, his legs feeling like lead. He recounted the harrowing events, his voice rough with emotion, omitting no detail of Billy's fall and the subsequent rescue. As he spoke, Silas and Caleb stood nearby, their presence a quiet testament to the shared ordeal. Maria listened, her face paling with each word, her arms tightening around Billy. When Jedediah finished, the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken gratitude. Maria looked at Silas and Caleb, her eyes filled with an emotion that transcended words. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "Thank you for saving my grandson." Silas simply nodded, his gruff demeanor softening slightly. "He's a tough one, that boy. He'll be all right." He looked at Jedediah. "We best be getting on. Sun's going down." Jedediah nodded. "Thank you again, Silas." "Caleb." He paused, the words of reconciliation feeling foreign yet necessary. Maybe we can set aside some of that old bad blood, for Billy's sake, if nothing else." A slow smile spread across Silas Henderson's face, creasing the weathered skin around his eyes. "Maybe we can, Jedediah, maybe we can." He turned his horse, Caleb following suit. "We'll be by if you need anything." As the Henderson riders disappeared into the twilight, leaving behind only a fading dust trail, Jedediah looked at Billy, who was now leaning against Maria, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. The boy had faced his fear, and he had survived. The well, once a symbol of forbidden curiosity and lurking danger, had become the site of a terrifying ordeal, but also inadvertently a catalyst for healing. The first steps had been taken, not just from the edge of the well, but towards a brighter, more connected future. The weight of grief and fear, though still present, felt a little lighter now. The handshake between Jedediah Miller and Silas Henderson, once a symbol of animosity, now felt like the tentative beginning of something fragile. The rescue of young Billy from the old well had served as a stark unifying crisis, but the deep roots of their long-standing feud wouldn't be so easily severed. As Silas and Caleb rode away, leaving the Miller ranch shrouded once more in its familiar quiet, Jedediah felt a complex mix of relief and apprehension. He was grateful for their help, deeply so, but he knew that the unspoken history between their families would continue to cast a long shadow. Maria fussed over Billy, her worry evident in every gentle touch, every anxious glance. The boy, though safe, was pale and withdrawn. The terror of his near-death experience lingered in his wide blue eyes. He was mostly silent, the usual torrent of questions replaced by a thoughtful quietude. He flinched at sudden noises and often stared blankly into space, replaying the horrifying moments of his fall and the subsequent rescue. "He needs rest, Maria," Jedediah said, watching his wife tend to their grandson. "And some quiet. The excitement. It's taken a toll." Maria nodded, her gaze fixed on Billy. "He was so brave, Jedediah. So brave." She looked up at her husband, her eyes searching his. "That old well, what is it about that place?" Jedediah sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "I don't rightly know, Maria. My father always warned me away from it, said it was unlucky, bad ground." He looked towards the west, where the abandoned well lay like a silent sentinel. "Maybe it's just the way things are out here. The land holds its secrets." Over the next few days, the ranch returned to its usual rhythm, but with a subtle undercurrent of change. Billy, though physically recovering, remained subdued. He rarely ventured far from his grandmother's side and seemed hesitant to explore the ranch grounds as he once had. The incident had undeniably shaken him, instilling a caution that Jedediah both welcomed and worried about. He didn't want his grandson to be crippled by fear, but he was grateful the boy now understood the weight of his grandfather's warnings. Jedediah, meanwhile, found himself increasingly thinking about Silas Henderson. The shared crisis had chipped away at the wall between them, but Jedediah knew that rebuilding trust would take time and consistent effort. He also knew that the Hendersons, despite their past conflicts, were skilled ranchers. Resources were often scarce in this arid land, and cooperation, when possible, could be a lifeline. One afternoon, while checking on a section of fence line that bordered the Henderson property, Jedediah spotted Silas and Caleb working on their own side. They were repairing a watering trough, their movements efficient and practiced. Jedediah hesitated for a moment, the old habit of avoidance warring with his new resolve. Taking a deep breath, he decided to risk it. He rode his mare slowly towards the fence line. Silas looked up as Jedediah approached, his expression unreadable. Caleb paused his work, his gaze curious. "Afternoon, Silas," Jedediah called out, keeping his voice even. "Jedediah," Silas responded, his tone neutral. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "Heard the boy's doing better." "He is," Jedediah confirmed. "Taking it slow. He's a resilient little fella." He gestured towards the watering trough. "Looks like that old trough's finally given up the ghost." Silas grunted in agreement. "Needs a proper fixin'. Parts ain't easy to come by." An idea began to form in Jedediah's mind. He knew a man in the nearest town who dealt in surplus ranch supplies, a man who might have the necessary parts for both of them. "I might know a fella in Redemption Gulch who's got a good supply of parts. If you're heading that way soon—" Silas looked at Jedediah, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. It was the first time Jedediah had offered anything resembling cooperation in years. "We were planning on heading in next week for supplies." "Might be worth asking him," Jedediah said. "I could send word, tell him you might be stopping by." Silas considered this for a moment, the wheels of his own pragmatic mind turning. The old well incident had shaken him too, a reminder of the fragility of life on the frontier. Perhaps Jedediah was right. Perhaps it was time to let go of some of the past. "That'd be appreciated, Jedediah. Thank you." It wasn't a full reconciliation, not by a long shot, but as Jedediah rode away, leaving Silas and Caleb to their work, he felt a small sense of accomplishment. The whispers of doubt about their past animosity were still there, but for the first time in a long time, they were being drowned out by the quiet hum of possibility. The memory of the well, a dark, suffocating abyss, clung to Billy like a persistent shadow. Sleep offered little respite. Night after night he was plagued by nightmares, visions of falling endlessly, of grasping at unseen edges, of a cold, damp darkness that seemed to press in on him. He would wake with a startled cry, his small body drenched in sweat, his heart pounding like a drum against his ribs. Maria would rush to his bedside, her own sleep disrupted, her face etched with concern. She would hold him, hum softly, and whisper words of comfort, her presence a soothing balm against the lingering terror. Jedediah, too, would often emerge from his room, his grizzled face creased with worry, offering a steady hand or a quiet word of reassurance. "It's just a bad dream, son," Jedediah would say, his voice a low rumble. "You're safe now, we're all here." But Billy struggled to shake the feeling of helplessness, the visceral memory of being trapped. The vastness of the prairie, once a source of wonder, now seemed menacing, its open spaces hinting at hidden dangers. He found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, his gaze drawn to the western horizon, to the silent, menacing presence of the old well. The ranch hands, witnessing Billy's unease, offered their own brand of quiet support. Cody, the quick-eyed young hand, would often find excuses to be near Billy, sharing a quiet word or a shy smile. Even Wade, the brash newcomer, seemed to have tempered his boisterous nature, offering Billy a respectful nod when they passed. They had all heard the story, seen the fear in the boy's eyes, and understood the unspoken trauma. One morning, a few weeks after the incident, Jedediah decided it was time to help Billy confront his lingering fear. He found his grandson sitting on the porch steps, listlessly watching a beetle crawl across the wood. "Mornin', Billy," Jedediah said, sitting down beside him. Billy mumbled a greeting, his gaze still fixed on the beetle. "You know," Jedediah began, his voice thoughtful, "the stars out here, they're something else, especially in the morning, just before the sun comes up." He gestured towards the eastern sky, which was beginning to lighten with the first blush of dawn. "They call that time the morning star, a sign that even the darkest night comes to an end." Billy looked up, his eyes following his grandfather's gesture. The sky was a deep velvety blue, dotted with the faint receding pinpricks of starlight. He hadn't paid much attention to the stars before, but now he saw a different kind of beauty in them, a silent, steadfast presence in the vast darkness. "See that bright one?" Jedediah pointed to Venus, hanging low on the horizon. "That's the morning star, always the first one to appear and the last one to fade. Reminds us that light always returns, no matter how dark the night gets." He placed a gentle hand on Billy's shoulder. "That fear you feel, son, it's like a long night. It feels endless sometimes, but like the stars, like the dawn, it will fade. You just gotta hold on, you gotta keep looking for that morning star." Billy was quiet for a long moment, absorbing his grandfather's words. He looked from the fading stars to his grandfather's steady, weathered face. There was a calmness in Jedediah's gaze, a quiet strength that Billy found himself drawn to. It wasn't the boisterous reassurance of his mother, but a different kind of comfort, a stoic understanding of hardship and resilience. That night, Billy slept a little more soundly. The nightmares still flickered at the edges of his consciousness, but they no longer held the same suffocating power. He dreamt of stars, of a pale, unwavering light guiding him through the darkness. He still felt a tremor of fear when he thought of the well, but it was now accompanied by a nascent sense of hope, a quiet understanding that even the deepest darkness could eventually give way to the dawn. The morning star, a distant promise of light, had begun to flicker in his young heart. The days following Billy's rescue settled into a new, albeit fragile, equilibrium. Billy's nightmares began to recede, replaced by longer stretches of peaceful sleep. He was still more reserved than before, his former boisterousness replaced by a thoughtful quietude, but the paralyzing fear had begun to dissipate. Jedediah saw this as a positive sign, a testament to his grandson's inherent resilience and the collective care of the ranch community. Maria, her maternal instincts keenly attuned to her grandson's well-being, continued to offer him comfort and stability. She didn't push him to be the carefree boy he once was, but rather encouraged his gentle introspection, celebrating the small victories, a genuine smile, a return of his appetite, a moment of shared laughter. Jedediah, meanwhile, was keenly aware that the demands of ranch life waited for no one, not even a family recovering from trauma. The annual cattle drive was fast approaching, a crucial undertaking that would determine a significant portion of the ranch's income for the year. It was a challenging endeavor, requiring long days in the saddle, navigating treacherous terrain and enduring harsh weather conditions. This year, however, the drive held an added layer of complexity. Jedediah knew he couldn't shield Billy from the world indefinitely, nor could he fully participate in the drive himself while keeping a constant eye on his recovering grandson. He discussed his concerns with Maria one evening, the flickering lamplight casting long shadows across their faces. "The drive," he began, his voice heavy with thought. "It's important, but with Billy still shaken, I don't know if I can be gone for weeks on end." Maria listened patiently, her expression thoughtful. "Billy's gotten stronger, Jedediah. He's not the same boy who fell down that well. He's faced something terrifying and come through it. He needs to see that life goes on, that we can't let fear dictate our days." She placed a comforting hand on his arm. "And he'll have me here. He'll be safe." Jedediah considered her words. Maria was right. Billy needed to witness the continuity of life, the unwavering rhythm of the ranch, and he, Jedediah, needed to fulfill his responsibilities. But who would accompany him on the drive? Silas Henderson's offer of cooperation, though appreciated, was still nascent. Relying on them so heavily, so soon, felt premature. Then Jedediah remembered Cody. The young ranch hand, Cody, had always shown a quiet competence and a steady reliability. He was a good rider, knew the land, and possessed a calm demeanor that would be invaluable on a long drive. Jedediah had also noticed Cody's gentle way with Billy, a quiet support that didn't intrude but offered a silent reassurance. The next morning, Jedediah approached Cody as he was tending to the horses. "Cody," he began, his tone serious, "I need a favor. A big one." Cody looked up, his eyes attentive. "Anything, Mr. Miller." "The cattle drive," Jedediah stated. "It's coming up. I need another hand, a good one, someone I can rely on out on the trail." He paused, meeting Cody's gaze. "I was hoping you'd consider joining me." Cody's eyes widened slightly, a mixture of surprise and eagerness. "Me, sir? On the drive?" "Aye," Jedediah confirmed. "You're a good rider, know the land, and, well, I've seen the way you look out for Billy. That tells me something about your character." A faint blush crept up Cody's neck. I'd be honored, Mr. Miller. Truly honored." Jedediah clapped him on the shoulder. "Good. We'll need to get ready. Supplies, horses, the usual. We'll be heading out in a fortnight." As Jedediah watched Cody return to his work, a sense of purpose settled over him. The drive was a necessity, a vital undertaking for the ranch's survival, and in Cody he had found a reliable companion, a steady presence for the arduous journey ahead. He knew Maria would manage the home front admirably, and Billy, though he would miss his grandfather, was stronger than he appeared. The approaching cattle drive, once a source of anxiety, now felt like a necessary step, a move forward into the uncertain yet promising future. The air at the Miller Ranch buzzed with a new energy. The looming cattle drive, once a distant prospect, now commanded immediate attention. Jedediah and Cody worked with a focused intensity, their days filled with the methodical preparation required for such an undertaking. The rhythmic clang of hammers, the creak of leather, and the low murmur of their conversations filled the ranch yard. Jedediah, despite his weariness, moved with a practiced efficiency. He oversaw the selection and shoeing of the horses destined for the drive, sturdy, reliable mounts that could withstand long hours and rough terrain. Cody, eager to prove his worth, worked alongside him, his movements quick and precise. He learned quickly, absorbing Jedediah's instructions with a quiet diligence that impressed the seasoned rancher. "This mare," Jedediah said, running a hand over the flank of a bay horse, "she's got spirit, good for keeping the herd tight, but she needs a steady hand. Don't let her run off with you." Cody nodded, observing the horse's spirited nature. "I'll be careful, Mr. Miller." They meticulously checked and repaired the gear, saddles, bridles, bedrolls, and the essential cooking implements that would sustain them on the trail. Jedediah emphasized the importance of every item, from the sturdiest rope to the sharpest knife. "Out on the trail, son," he'd said, his voice grave. "Your gear is your lifeline. Treat it with respect." Meanwhile, Maria was equally busy, her focus on provisioning. She baked loaves of bread that would keep for days, cured sides of beef and packed jars of preserves. Her pantry, usually well stocked, was now a testament to her foresight and diligence, ensuring that Jedediah and Cody would have ample provisions for the long journey ahead. She also spent extra time with Billy, preparing him for his grandfather's absence. "You be good for your grandma, Billy," Jedediah told his grandson one evening, kneeling to meet his gaze. "Help her with the chores. And remember what we talked about the stars and the dawn." Billy nodded, his lower lip trembling slightly. "Are you going to be gone long, Gramps?" "Long enough," Jedediah said softly. "But I'll be thinking of you every day, and you'll be right here, helping Grandma run things. You're getting to be a big help, son." He saw a flicker of pride in Billy's eyes, a small spark of the confidence he hoped the boy was regaining. He knew leaving him would be difficult, but he also believed it was necessary for both of them. Cody, too, found himself spending more time with Billy. He would show the boy how to properly care for a saddle, explain the different types of knots used for roping, or simply sit with him while he sketched in his worn notebook. There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared sense of responsibility for the ranch in Jedediah's absence. Jedediah also made a point of speaking with Silas Henderson again. "Silas," he said, finding the other rancher near the property line, "the drive starts in 2 weeks. If you happen to see any strays wandering onto my land while I'm gone, or if you need anything checked on your side, don't hesitate to send word." Silas nodded, a hint of surprise still evident in his eyes. "Will do, Jedediah. And if you run into any trouble out there on the trail, well, you know where to find us. We'll keep an eye on things here." The offer, though subtle, was significant. It was a tacit agreement, a recognition that their shared interests now extended beyond their immediate properties. As the days dwindled towards the departure date, Jedediah felt a cautious optimism. The preparations were complete. Billy was showing signs of growing strength, and the tentative bridge built with the Hendersons offered a glimmer of future cooperation. The trail awaited, and with it both the challenges of the cattle drive and the continuing evolution of relationships on the unforgiving prairie. The morning of the departure was crisp and cool, the pre-dawn air carrying the scent of dew-kissed earth and distant wood smoke. Jedediah stood by his mare, his saddlebags packed, his bedroll secured. Cody, his face set with a mixture of excitement and determination, adjusted the cinch on his own mount. Maria and Billy stood on the porch, their faces illuminated by the lantern light, a silent tableau of farewell. "You be good, Billy," Jedediah said, kneeling to look his grandson in the eye. "Help your grandma, and remember what I told you." He clasped Billy's shoulder firmly. "We'll be back before you know it." Billy nodded, his lower lip caught between his teeth. "Be careful, Gramps." Maria stepped forward, her eyes glistening. "You take care of yourself, Jedediah, and look after Cody." She hugged him tightly. "Come back safe." Jedediah returned the embrace, a rare display of open affection. "I always do, Maria." He looked at Cody. "Ready, son?" Cody nodded, his gaze steady. "Ready, Mr. Miller." With a final wave to Maria and Billy, Jedediah and Cody mounted their horses. They turned their mounts towards the west, towards the vast, open expanse that lay between the Miller Ranch and the distant markets. The herd, already gathered and restless, lowed nervously as the riders approached. Silas and Caleb Henderson watched from their own property line, a silent acknowledgement of the journey beginning. The initial miles were familiar, the rolling hills and scrub-covered plains of their home territory. Jedediah rode with a practiced ease, his eyes scanning the herd, his mind already assessing their behavior, anticipating potential problems. Cody rode beside him, absorbing the rhythm of the trail, his gaze darting from the herd to the horizon, his senses sharpening with each mile that passed. "Keep 'em moving steady," Jedediah instructed, his voice carrying easily on the breeze. "Don't want 'em getting spooked early on." Cody nodded, adjusting his position to help keep the stragglers in line. The sheer size of the herd, several hundred head of cattle, was an impressive sight, a powerful force of muscle and instinct that required constant vigilance. As the day wore on, the landscape began to change. The familiar terrain gave way to more rugged country, the gentle slopes replaced by steeper inclines and rocky outcrops. The sun beat down relentlessly, the heat intensifying with each passing hour. Jedediah and Cody took turns riding the flanks, ensuring the herd moved as a cohesive unit, their movements dictated by the subtle cues of the lead animals. They made their first camp as dusk began to settle, a rudimentary affair. A small fire was built, and the scent of coffee soon mingled with the earthy aroma of the cattle. They tethered their horses securely, their bedrolls spread out on the ground. The vast, star-studded sky, a canopy of glittering diamonds, stretched above them. Billy's words about the morning star echoed in Jedediah's mind, a comforting thought in the immense solitude. "Tough day," Cody said, stretching his weary limbs. "Just the beginning, son," Jedediah replied, stirring the campfire. "Tomorrow we hit the Red Creek Flats, gets rougher there." He looked at Cody, a sense of quiet camaraderie forming between them. "You're holding up well." Cody managed a tired smile. "Learning a lot, Mr. Miller." As they ate their simple meal, the lowing of the cattle and the chirping of crickets were the only sounds. The immensity of the journey ahead settled upon them, a silent challenge. But with each mile covered, with each task completed, a sense of accomplishment grew. They were on the trail, fulfilling their duty, carrying the hopes of the Miller Ranch with them across the wild, untamed West. The Red Creek Flats lived up to Jedediah's warning. The terrain became increasingly difficult, a patchwork of dry creek beds, thorny scrub, and treacherous ravines. The cattle, already weary from the steady pace, grew restless, their instincts heightened by the unfamiliar surroundings. Jedediah and Cody rode with renewed vigilance, their senses on high alert. "Keep 'em bunched," Jedediah called out, his voice strained against the wind. "Don't want 'em breaking for the brush." Cody, his face grim with concentration, urged his horse to flank the herd, his movements precise and economical. He had learned much from Jedediah in these first few days, not just about handling cattle, but about reading the land, anticipating the animals' moods, and the quiet discipline required for survival on the trail. Suddenly, a thunderous bellow erupted from the heart of the herd. A large bull, agitated and unpredictable, had decided it had had enough of the slow, steady march. It lowered its head, its eyes wild, and began to charge, its massive weight shaking the ground. Panic rippled through the herd as other cattle, sensing the commotion, began to shift and mill. "Whoa there!" Jedediah shouted, spurring his mare forward. He rode towards the charging bull, his aim to cut it off, to redirect its fury away from the main herd. It was a dangerous maneuver, requiring immense skill and courage. The bull, a ton of brute force and anger, was a formidable opponent. Cody watched, his heart in his throat, as Jedediah engaged the bull. He saw the way Jedediah's mare skillfully maneuvered, feinting and weaving, trying to turn the beast without getting too close. But the bull was relentless, its horns lowered, its powerful charge unwavering. Then Jedediah's mare stumbled slightly on the uneven ground. The bull seized the opportunity, its horns narrowly missing the horse's flank. Jedediah fought to regain control, his face a mask of grim determination. Seeing Jedediah in peril, Cody didn't hesitate. He spurred his own horse forward, not towards the bull directly, but towards a cluster of spooked cows that were beginning to break away from the main herd, threatening to draw more animals into a stampede. His goal was to intercept them, to prevent the chaos from spreading. "Get back in line," Cody yelled, his voice surprisingly strong, as he cut off the panicked cows. He rode hard, his horse agile and responsive, forcing the straying animals back towards the herd. It was a risky move, drawing him away from Jedediah, but he knew that a widespread stampede would be far more dangerous. Jedediah, seeing Cody's action, felt a surge of pride mixed with his own adrenaline. The young man was proving his mettle. With renewed focus, Jedediah managed to regain control of his mare and, with a final daring maneuver, cut off the bull's charge, forcing it to turn back towards the more subdued sections of the herd. Slowly, painstakingly, the chaos subsided. The scattered cattle were rounded up, the agitated bull eventually calmed, and the herd settled back into its weary rhythm. Jedediah rode over to Cody, who was calmly herding the last of the straying cows back into place. "Good work, Cody," Jedediah said, his voice hoarse but firm. "You kept your head. That's what counts out here." Cody looked at Jedediah, a weary but satisfied grin spreading across his face. "You handled that bull like a pro, Mr. Miller." Jedediah offered a rare, genuine smile. "We looked out for each other, son. That's how we get through this." He glanced back at the restless herd, the vast, unforgiving landscape stretching before them. The drive was far from over, and this was only the first major test. But as he looked at Cody, he knew they had the strength and the willingness to rely on each other, to face whatever lay ahead. Days blurred into a relentless cycle of sun, dust, and the constant lowing presence of the herd. The initial excitement of the cattle drive had long since faded, replaced by a deep, pervasive weariness that settled into their bones. Jedediah and Cody rode for hours under the scorching sun, their faces caked with dust, their throats raw from the dry air. Water, once taken for granted, had become a precious commodity, each sip savored. They rationed their supplies carefully, relying on the streams and waterholes they encountered along the way. But the drought that had plagued the land for months had taken its toll. Many of the usual watering spots were reduced to muddy puddles, or worse, bone-dry cracks in the earth. The cattle, sensitive to the lack of water, grew increasingly agitated, their lowing a constant mournful chorus. "This ain't good, Jedediah," Cody said one sweltering afternoon, his voice raspy. He pointed to a dried-up creek bed. "Last time through here, this was running deep." Jedediah scanned the desolate landscape, his brow furrowed with concern. "We'll have to push on. There's a fair-sized waterhole near the Rattlesnake Buttes. Should be enough there, if the rumors are true." The journey to Rattlesnake Buttes was arduous. The heat intensified and the cattle grew more desperate. Jedediah and Cody rode constantly, their horses lathered, their own bodies aching with fatigue. They kept the herd moving, pushing them forward with a grim determination, knowing that any delay could be disastrous. The thirst gnawed at them, a constant, uncomfortable ache. When they finally reached the vicinity of the Rattlesnake Buttes, a sense of unease settled over Jedediah. The landscape here was particularly harsh, a maze of jagged rocks and thorny mesquite. He scanned the area, searching for any sign of water. "There!" Cody suddenly exclaimed, pointing towards a low-lying area between two prominent rock formations. A small, muddy pool shimmered in the distance. It wasn't much, but it was water. Relief washed over Jedediah, quickly followed by caution. "Careful, Cody. Rattlesnakes favor these kinds of spots." They approached slowly, Jedediah leading the way, his eyes scanning the ground. The cattle, sensing the water, surged forward, their lowing turning into desperate bellows. Jedediah and Cody had to work quickly, guiding the animals towards the waterhole, ensuring they didn't trample the fragile banks or fight amongst themselves. As the cattle began to drink, a low hiss, followed by a sharp rattle, made Jedediah freeze. Not 10 feet from the water's edge, coiled and ready to strike, was a large diamondback rattlesnake. It was directly in the path of several approaching cows. Jedediah drew his pistol, his hand steady despite his fatigue. Cody, seeing the imminent danger, grabbed a sturdy club from his saddle. "Stay back, Cody," Jedediah warned. He took careful aim. The snake, sensing the movement, tensed. Just as Jedediah squeezed the trigger, Cody swung his club with all his might, aiming to stun the snake and give Jedediah a clear shot. The two actions happened almost simultaneously. The pistol shot cracked through the air, and the heavy thud of Cody's club connected with the snake's body. The snake, wounded and disoriented, thrashed wildly. Jedediah fired again, hitting his mark. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the close call left them both shaken. "That was too close," Cody breathed, wiping sweat from his brow. Jedediah nodded, holstering his pistol. "Too close. We'll water the horses further out. Let the herd have their fill here, then we move on come morning. Can't linger too long." They watered their horses at a distance. The unnerving encounter with the rattlesnake, a stark reminder of the constant dangers they faced. The weariness was palpable, but the successful, albeit perilous access to water had renewed their spirits. They had faced another challenge and overcome it together. As they set up their meager camp for the night, the sound of the cattle drinking deeply was a welcome, reassuring melody. The cattle drive pushed onward, the landscape gradually shifting from the harsh desolation of the Rattlesnake Buttes towards the rolling grasslands that promised easier terrain and hopefully more reliable water sources. Jedediah and Cody had fallen into a comfortable, efficient rhythm, their communication honed by days of shared labor and mutual reliance. Yet, despite the outward calm, a sense of unease began to creep into Jedediah's mind. He had a feeling, a nagging intuition that something was amiss. It started subtly. Jedediah noticed a few more stray cattle than usual on the edges of the herd, animals that seemed to be drifting away. their movements listless. He attributed it to the lingering effects of the drought and the weariness of the long journey. Then one evening, as they prepared to make camp, Cody pointed towards a distant ridge. "See that smoke, Mr. Miller?" Cody asked, his voice low. "Looks like a campfire." Jedediah squinted, his eyes adjusting to the fading light. Indeed, a faint plume of smoke curled into the sky, miles away but undeniably present. Could be another outfit, Jedediah mused, though a knot of suspicion tightened in his stomach. Or it could be rustlers laying low. The possibility of rustlers was a constant threat on the open range, a danger that Jedediah had faced many times in his life. He and Cody increased their vigilance, taking turns on watch throughout the night, their senses strained, listening for any unusual sounds. The herd, sensing the heightened tension, remained skittish, their lowing a constant, nervous hum. The next morning, the unease solidified into grim certainty. As Jedediah rode out to check the perimeter of the herd, he discovered a trail of hoof prints, distinct and deliberate, leading away from their camp and towards the direction of the smoke. The prints were too wide-set for cattle, too purposeful for wild animals. They were unmistakably those of horses, ridden hard. "Rustlers," Jedediah stated grimly, returning to Cody, who was tending to the remuda. "Someone's been poking around. Hit us while we were sleeping, I reckon." Cody's face hardened. "How many?" "Hard to say. Tracks are messy, but at least 2, maybe 3 riders. Took some of the prime heifers." Jedediah's jaw tightened. Losing even a few head could significantly impact their profits, especially after the difficult journey thus far. He looked towards the distant ridge, the source of the smoke, now a place of ominous significance. "They'll be heading southeast, trying to put distance between us and them. We can't let 'em get too far." Cody met Jedediah's determined gaze. "What's the plan, Mr. Miller?" Jedediah thought for a moment, his mind weighing the risks. Pursuing rustlers was dangerous, often leading to violent confrontations. But leaving them to get away with the stolen cattle was unthinkable. He thought of Billy back home, of Maria, of the hard work that had gone into assembling this herd. "We'll take the fastest horses," Jedediah decided. "You and I. We'll ride hard, try to cut 'em off before they reach the broken hills. Leave the herd here, make sure they don't drift too far. If we can't catch 'em, at least we can mark their trail, let the sheriff know." Cody nodded, his expression resolute. He trusted Jedediah's judgment. The prospect of confronting rustlers was daunting, but he was ready to face the challenge alongside his mentor. As they quickly saddled their swiftest mounts, Jedediah couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter, this shadow from the past of the West, was an unavoidable part of the trail they were forging. The chase was on. Jedediah and Cody rode like the wind, their horses' hooves pounding a frantic rhythm against the dry earth. The trail of the rustlers, though growing fainter with the passage of time and the uneven terrain, was still discernible to Jedediah's experienced eye. He pushed his mare relentlessly, his focus solely on the distant, unseen figures who had dared to prey on their livelihood. Cody rode close behind, his breathing heavy, his own horse straining under the furious pace. The vast, open landscape, which had seemed so liberating just days before, now felt like a hostile, unforgiving arena for this desperate pursuit. The sun beat down relentlessly, their waterskins growing lighter with each mile. Jedediah's thoughts were a whirlwind of strategy and grim determination. He knew they were outnumbered and likely outgunned. Their goal wasn't necessarily a direct confrontation, but to cut off the rustlers, to recover the stolen heifers, and, if possible, to identify them for the authorities. "Think they know we're coming?" Cody shouted over the wind, his voice hoarse. "Doubt it," Jedediah yelled back. "They'll think we're tied to the herd, but we gotta push 'em. Can't let 'em get into the broken hills. Too much cover there." The broken hills loomed in the distance, a jagged, formidable range of rock formations and canyons, notorious for providing refuge for outlaws and rustlers. Reaching them before the thieves would be crucial. Jedediah urged his mare to a faster pace, his eyes fixed on the faint signs on the ground. He saw where the rustlers had pushed their horses harder, where they had cut across rocky ground, leaving less distinct tracks. As they crested a low rise, Jedediah suddenly reined in his horse, holding up a hand for Cody to stop. "Hold up," he whispered, his eyes narrowing. "Look there." In the distance, silhouetted against the harsh sunlight, were 3 riders. They were driving a small group of cattle, heifers, unmistakably the ones stolen from the Miller herd. They were moving at a steady, unhurried pace, confident that they were putting enough distance between themselves and any potential pursuers. "3 of them," Cody murmured, his hand instinctively going to the pistol holstered at his hip. Jedediah studied the rustlers, his gaze sharp and assessing. He recognized the build of one of the riders, the way he sat his horse. A cold dread washed over him. It couldn't be. Not him. "That one," Jedediah said, his voice tight, pointing with his chin. "The one on the sorrel. That's Slick Jimmy Doyle." Cody looked, his eyes widening in disbelief. Slick Jimmy Doyle was a name whispered in hushed tones throughout the territory. A notorious rustler and gambler with a reputation for violence and treachery. He had a history with Jedediah, a past entanglement involving a bad debt and a broken promise that Jedediah had long since tried to bury. "Doyle," Cody breathed. "I thought he was run out of Redemption Gulch years ago." "He was," Jedediah said, his voice grim. "Looks like he's back and looking for an easy score." The personal animosity Jedediah felt towards Doyle added a dangerous edge to the pursuit. This wasn't just about stolen cattle anymore. Jedediah knew they couldn't afford to let Doyle and his men get away. The risk was immense, but the principle, the defiance of such brazen theft, demanded action. He looked at Cody, his expression resolute. "We're going to have to do more than just mark their trail, son. We're going to have to get those heifers back." The chase had just taken a much more personal and dangerous turn. The tension in the air was as thick as the dust kicked up by their horses' hooves. Jedediah and Cody had tracked Slick Jimmy Doyle and his 2 companions into a narrow, winding canyon. The stolen heifers were visible ahead, corralled clumsily against a rock face, their nervous lowing echoing off the canyon walls. Doyle and his men, sensing they were cornered, had turned to face their pursuers. "Well, Jedediah Miller," Doyle sneered, a cruel grin splitting his face. He was a wiry man with eyes that constantly darted, assessing every angle, every threat. His 2 companions, rough-looking men with hard faces, flanked him, their hands resting near the pistols at their belts. "Fancy meeting you out here. Come to collect what's rightfully mine?" Jedediah's grip tightened on his reins, his knuckles white. The old anger, long suppressed, flared within him. "Yours, Doyle? These heifers are Miller stock. You know that as well as I do." "Times change, Jedediah," Doyle chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "And fortunes shift. You got complacent, got soft. This land ain't for the weak." He gestured dismissively towards Cody. "And you bring a greenhorn with you now? Brave move." Cody shifted in his saddle, his hand inching closer to his firearm. He was outnumbered and facing a notorious outlaw, but Jedediah's calm demeanor seemed to steady him. "We're taking back what's ours, Doyle," Jedediah stated, his voice dangerously low. "Just hand over the cattle and no one needs to get hurt." Doyle threw his head back and laughed. "Hurt? Jedediah, you always were a fool. You think I'm going to hand over a good score just 'cause you asked nicely? Not a chance." He nodded to his men. "Get 'em!" The canyon erupted in a flurry of movement and gunfire. Jedediah and Cody reacted instantly, drawing their own pistols and seeking what little cover the rocky terrain offered. Bullets whizzed past, ricocheting off the canyon walls with deafening cracks. Jedediah fired back, aiming for accuracy, not just noise. He saw one of Doyle's men stumble, clutching his arm. Cody, though younger, proved surprisingly adept. He used the rocks for cover, firing quick, precise shots. He saw Doyle attempting to flank them, trying to get behind their horses. "Doyle's moving," Cody yelled, firing a shot that forced Doyle to duck behind a large boulder. Jedediah knew they couldn't win a prolonged shootout in such confined quarters. They needed to create an opening, to seize an advantage. He saw his chance. Doyle's men were pinned down by Cody's accurate fire. Doyle himself was momentarily exposed as he repositioned behind the boulder. Jedediah took aim, not at Doyle, but at the loose scree just above the outlaw's head. He fired. The shot dislodged a shower of rocks and dirt, startling Doyle and forcing him to scramble back. In that instant of distraction, Jedediah saw his opportunity. "Cody, now!" Jedediah roared. While Doyle was momentarily disoriented, Jedediah and Cody spurred their horses forward, not directly at Doyle but towards the penned-up heifers. Their aim was to create chaos, to scatter the cattle and make it impossible for Doyle and his men to control them. The frightened heifers, sensing the commotion and the opening, surged forward, breaking through the makeshift corral. They bolted past Doyle and his remaining man, creating a wall of panicked livestock between the pursuers and the thieves. Jedediah and Cody pressed their advantage, using their horses to expertly cut off the rustlers' escape route, herding them further into the canyon. Doyle, realizing his plan had gone awry, cursed loudly. His men, caught between the stampeding cattle and the determined ranchers, were in disarray. The element of surprise and control had shifted. Jedediah saw his chance. He rode hard, cutting off Doyle's path, his pistol leveled. "It's over, Doyle," Jedediah said, his voice firm. "You and your men are under arrest." Doyle's eyes darted between Jedediah, Cody, and the retreating heifers. He knew he was beaten. His remaining man, seeing the hopelessness of their situation, dropped his pistol. Doyle, with a snarl of frustration, slowly raised his hands. The confrontation in the canyon had ended, but the long road back and the reckoning for Doyle's actions was just beginning. The canyon was silent again, save for the retreating lowing of the recovered heifers and the ragged breaths of Jedediah and Cody. Doyle and his two men, their faces a mixture of anger and defeat, were disarmed and bound with rope. The stolen cattle, though scattered, were now moving back towards Jedediah's control, their panicked flight having inadvertently served their owner's purpose. Jedediah looked at Doyle, the man who had haunted his past, now a pathetic figure bound by rope. "You caused a lot of trouble over the years, Doyle, too much." Doyle spat on the ground. "You got lucky, Miller. That's all." "Luck don't bring back stolen cattle, Doyle," Jedediah retorted, his voice devoid of emotion. "Or the peace of mind you cost decent folk." He looked at Cody, who was efficiently securing the rustlers' horses. "We'll take the heifers back. You three, you'll be heading to Redemption Gulch with us. Sheriff Brody will want a word." The ride back was a tense affair. Jedediah and Cody rode with Doyle and his men, ensuring no further trouble arose. The recovered heifers, though spooked, were manageable, their instinct to follow Jedediah's lead reasserting itself. Jedediah felt a sense of weary satisfaction. They had faced a dangerous situation and emerged victorious, not just recovering the stolen livestock, but confronting a ghost from his past. Cody rode with a newfound confidence. He had faced down rustlers, ridden hard, and proven his mettle. The experience had solidified his respect for Jedediah and given him a taste of the true challenges of life on the trail. As they neared the main herd, which had been left under Cody's temporary care, Jedediah saw the relief on the faces of the other ranch hands who had stayed behind. They had seen the dust cloud of the chase and had been anxiously awaiting news. "You got 'em back, Mr. Miller," one of the hands exclaimed, his voice filled with relief. "We did," Jedediah confirmed, gesturing towards the scattered heifers. "Thanks to Cody here." He clapped Cody on the shoulder. "He did good work." Cody flushed slightly at the praise, but his smile was genuine. The task of integrating the recovered heifers back into the main herd was soon underway. Jedediah, however, knew that Doyle and his men couldn't simply be left to the sheriff without ensuring some level of accountability. He decided that he and Cody would escort them to Redemption Gulch. It was a detour, adding time to their journey, but Jedediah felt a responsibility to see justice done, especially given his personal history with Doyle. "We'll take 'em in," Jedediah told Cody, as they prepared to leave the main herd under the watch of the other hands. "You ready for a little trip to town?" "Whenever you are, Mr. Miller," Cody replied, his gaze steady. The journey to Redemption Gulch was shorter than the main drive, but filled with a different kind of tension. Doyle and his men were sullen and resentful, but cowed by their capture. Jedediah kept a watchful eye, his hand never far from his pistol. He knew Doyle was capable of treachery even in his current state. Arriving in Redemption Gulch, a dusty, ramshackle town that seemed to embody the rough justice of the West, Jedediah and Cody escorted Doyle and his men to Sheriff Brody's office. Sheriff Brody, a burly man with a weary expression, listened intently as Jedediah recounted the events, his eyes narrowing as he heard Doyle's name. "Doyle, eh?" Brody grunted, clapping the irons onto the rustlers. "Figured he'd turn up somewhere eventually. Been hearing whispers." He looked at Jedediah. "Thanks for bringing him in, Miller. Saves us a lot of trouble." Jedediah nodded. "Just doing what's right. They took my cattle." As they left the sheriff's office, the weight of the confrontation and the ensuing journey lifted slightly. Justice, in its own rough-and-tumble way, had been served. But Jedediah knew that the repercussions of this encounter, the resurfacing of old enmities, might not be entirely over. The West, he was constantly reminded, was a place where the past rarely stayed buried for long. The detour to Redemption Gulch had taken more time than Jedediah had anticipated. While the recovery of the heifers and the capture of Doyle were significant victories, the delay meant the main herd would have to be pushed harder to make up for lost time. As Jedediah and Cody rode back towards their scattered charges, the sun beat down with renewed intensity, the landscape seeming to stretch endlessly before them. Back at the ranch, Maria had received word of the rustler incident via a passing rider. Her relief that Billy was safe and that Jedediah had recovered the cattle was immense, but the mention of Slick Jimmy Doyle sent a shiver of apprehension down her spine. She remembered the name from years ago, a shadow that had briefly loomed over Jedediah's past. She found herself watching Billy more closely, her maternal anxieties amplified. Billy, sensing his grandmother's heightened worry, tried to be helpful, taking on extra chores without complaint. He missed his grandfather dearly, but the memory of their conversation about the morning star, about the light returning after darkness, had taken root. He understood in his own way that his grandfather was doing important work that protected their way of life. One afternoon, while helping Maria sort through a bin of old photographs, Billy came across a faded picture of his mother. He traced her smiling face with his finger, a pang of sadness in his chest. "Grandma," he asked softly, "did Grandpa ever get into trouble like those men he caught?" Maria hesitated, carefully choosing her words. "Your grandpa is a good man, Billy. He's always tried to do what's right. Sometimes, though, people from his past, they cause trouble. But he's strong. He always faces it head-on." She looked at the photograph, a wistful smile on her face. "Your mother was very proud of him, of the man he was." Billy looked at the picture, then at his grandmother. He felt a growing understanding of the complexities of his grandfather's life, the burdens he carried, and the quiet strength he possessed. It wasn't the same as his mother's vibrant warmth, but it was a different kind of strength, a resilience forged in the crucible of the West. Meanwhile, Jedediah and Cody were back with the herd, pushing them westward. The encounter with Doyle had served as a stark reminder of the constant vigilance required on the trail. Jedediah found himself reviewing his past, not with regret, but with a newfound appreciation for the path he had chosen. His life on the ranch, the quiet rhythm of the seasons, the responsibility he felt towards his family and his land. It was a life of purpose, a stark contrast to the lawless existence of men like Doyle. He also found himself reflecting on his relationship with Cody. The young man had proven himself to be more than just a hired hand. He was a reliable partner, a steady presence. Jedediah saw in Cody a reflection of his own younger self, perhaps, but also a different kind of character, tempered by a different set of experiences. He felt a growing sense of responsibility to guide Cody, not just in the ways of ranching, but in the values that truly mattered. As they continued their journey, the landscape began to change again. The grasslands gave way to more arid, open territory, the distant mountains a constant, imposing presence on the horizon. They were still weeks away from their destination, but the most immediate dangers, the rustlers, the lack of water, had been overcome. Jedediah felt a sense of cautious optimism. The road ahead was still long, but he felt more prepared, more grounded than he had in a long time. The shadows of the past had been confronted, and the path forward, though challenging, seemed clearer. The relentless westward march of the cattle continued. Days bled into weeks, marked by the monotonous rhythm of the trail, the pre-dawn awakenings, the endless hours in the saddle, the watchful nights under a sky vast and indifferent. Jedediah and Cody worked seamlessly, their movements economical, their communication reduced to curt nods and shared glances. The herd, though weary, was moving steadily, the bulk of the drive heading towards the distant markets. One afternoon, as they navigated a stretch of sparsely vegetated prairie, Jedediah spotted a lone rider approaching in the distance. The rider was moving slowly, his posture suggesting weariness or perhaps injury. Jedediah signaled for Cody to stay with the herd while he rode out to investigate. As he drew closer, Jedediah recognized the distinctive markings of a rider from the neighboring Henderson's ranch. It was Caleb Henderson, Silas's son, but Caleb was slumped low in his saddle, his face pale and drawn, his horse moving with a labored gait. "Caleb?" Jedediah called out, his voice filled with concern. "What in tarnation happened to you?" Caleb looked up, his eyes widening slightly in surprise, then relief. "Mr. Miller, it's "It's my father." His voice was weak, strained. He took a fall. Bad one. Jedediah spurred his mare forward, reaching Caleb's side. He could see the extent of the young man's exhaustion. A fall? Where? Out near the dry fork, Caleb managed, wincing as he spoke. Was checking a waterline. Horse threw him, landed hard. I think his legs broke. He gestured weakly back the way he had come. I rode for help. Found some riders heading east. Told him to fetch Doc Evans from Redemption Gulch. But Pa, he's alone out there. And the sun's going down. Jedediah's mind raced. Silas Henderson, alone and injured, miles from immediate help. He thought of the recent truce, the nascent cooperation between their families. Silas had helped rescue Billy. Now, it was Jedediah's turn. "How far back?" Jedediah asked, his voice urgent. Maybe 5 miles, Caleb rasped. "By the split oak." Jedediah didn't hesitate. "You stay here, Caleb. Rest your horse. I'll ride back." "Cody!" he called, signaling to his young partner. Cody quickly moved towards Jedediah, leaving the herd under the watchful eyes of the remaining hands, who had been brought closer due to the need for increased security. "Rustlers or not, someone needs help," Jedediah explained quickly to Cody. "It's Silas Henderson. Took a bad fall. Caleb's here, but he's exhausted. I'm going back to him. You keep an eye on the herd. If anything seems amiss, if you see any sign of trouble, you ride hard for Redemption Gulch. Understand?" Cody nodded, his expression serious. "Yes, sir, I understand." Jedediah gave Caleb a reassuring nod. "Hang in there, son. Help's coming." Then he turned his mare and rode back the way they had come, his heart pounding with a renewed urgency. The cattle drive, the rustlers, the long journey, all momentarily took a back seat to the immediate need to aid a neighbor, a gesture that spoke volumes about the evolving dynamics on the frontier. The harshness of the land often forced unlikely alliances, and Jedediah Miller, pragmatic as ever, understood the importance of extending a hand when it was needed most. Jedediah rode like a man possessed, his mare's hooves churning up dust as he raced back towards the dry fork. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and crimson, a beautiful yet ominous backdrop to his urgent mission. Every moment counted. Silas Henderson, injured and alone, needed immediate attention, and the encroaching darkness brought with it a host of new dangers: the cold, the vulnerability to wildlife, and the sheer terror of being lost and hurt. He reached the split oak where Caleb had indicated his father had fallen. The sight that greeted him was grim. Silas lay on the ground, his leg bent at an unnatural angle, his face contorted in pain. His horse stood nearby, grazing nervously, seemingly oblivious to its rider's plight. Silas looked up as Jedediah approached, his eyes weary but clear. "Jedediah," Silas rasped, his voice strained. "Didn't expect to see you." "Caleb sent word," Jedediah said, dismounting quickly. He knelt beside Silas, his experienced eyes assessing the injury. The leg was clearly broken, likely badly. "Doc Evans is on his way from Redemption Gulch. Caleb rode to fetch him." Silas grimaced, a flicker of pain crossing his face. Stubborn fool, he should have known better than to trust that dry creek bed. He tried to shift, letting out a sharp cry of agony. "Don't move," Jedediah commanded gently but firmly. "We need to make you as comfortable as possible until the doc gets here. Sun's going down fast." Jedediah assessed their surroundings. The terrain was uneven, making it difficult to move Silas without causing further injury. He looked at his own horse, a strong, sturdy animal. He then looked at Silas's horse, a calmer, more placid creature. An idea began to form. "Silas," Jedediah said, his mind working quickly, "we need to get you somewhere warmer, safer, before full dark. Doc's coming, but it'll be a while. I think we can rig something up with my mare and your horse. Make a travois. Get you back towards Caleb and the main trail." Silas looked skeptical, but the pain in his eyes betrayed his desperation. Travois? You sure, Jedediah? That's a ways." "We ain't got much choice," Jedediah replied, already gathering branches and using strips of leather from his saddlebags to fashion a makeshift sledge. "You need shelter, and we need to get you moving before the temperature drops." Jedediah worked with a focused intensity, his movements efficient and practiced. He used sturdy branches, lashing them together to create a frame that could be dragged. He then used his saddle blankets and spare canvas to create a crude but effective padding. Silas, gritting his teeth against the pain, cooperated as best he could, providing Jedediah with directions on how to best support his injured leg. The process was slow and agonizing. Jedediah hitched his mare to the front of the travois, using its strength to pull the frame. Silas, with Jedediah's careful assistance, was carefully positioned onto the makeshift sled. Every jolt sent waves of pain through him, but he bore it stoically, his gaze fixed on Jedediah's determined face. As Jedediah began to slowly pull the travois, guided by Silas's pained directions, the last rays of sunlight vanished. The desert night descended swiftly, bringing with it a biting chill. The vast, starry sky, once a source of comfort, now seemed immense and cold. Jedediah's breath plumed in the air. He kept pulling, his muscles burning, his focus unwavering. He thought of Billy, safe on the ranch, and of the herd now under Cody's watchful eye. He knew he had made the right decision. The old animosities were irrelevant now. In the vast, unforgiving expanse of the West, a neighbor's need trumped all else. The slow, arduous journey back towards Caleb and the main trail was a testament to Jedediah's resilience and Silas's stoicism. Each pull of the travois sent agonizing jolts through Silas's injured leg, and Jedediah's own body screamed with fatigue. The desert night was growing colder, the vast expanse of stars above offering little warmth. Yet amidst the discomfort and the pain, a new understanding began to dawn between the two men. "You didn't have to do this, Jedediah," Silas finally managed, his voice raspy, the words punctuated by gasps of pain. "Could have just waited for the dock." Jedediah paused, wiping sweat from his brow despite the chill. "Nothing to it, Silas. A man's got to look out for his neighbors, especially when they're in a tight spot." He looked towards the faint lights of the distant herd, now visible as tiny pinpricks in the darkness. Cody would be keeping a close watch. "Besides," he added, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, "seems like we got ourselves into a habit of saving each other's kin." Silas let out a weak chuckle, a sound that was quickly stifled by a wince of pain. "Reckon we do." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "That business with Doyle, you handled him well." Jedediah grunted. "Just did what needed doing. He's a snake, that one. Glad we put a stop to his little racket." They continued their slow progress in silence, the only sounds the creak of the travois, the soft padding of Jedediah's mare's hooves, and the distant murmur of the cattle. The vastness of the night, usually a source of quiet contemplation for Jedediah, now felt both immense and strangely intimate. Stripped of their usual defenses, bound by shared hardship, the two men found a common ground that years of rivalry had failed to erase. As they drew closer to the herd, Jedediah could see Cody silhouetted against the campfire, a vigilant guardian. He spotted Caleb approaching, his face a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Pa!" Caleb cried, rushing forward as he saw the travois. He quickly took the reins from Jedediah, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You're all right." "Busted leg, son," Silas said, managing a weak smile. "But thanks to Jedediah here, I'll be all right." Jedediah, his strength nearly depleted, dismounted, his legs feeling like lead. He watched as Caleb, with surprising strength, helped his father onto a softer bed of blankets near the fire, ensuring he was as comfortable as possible. Cody brought Jedediah a canteen of water, his expression one of quiet respect. "You did good, Mr. Miller," Cody said softly. "Handling all that." Jedediah nodded, taking a long, slow drink. "We all did what we had to, son." As Silas was made as comfortable as possible, Jedediah sat by the fire, the warmth seeping into his weary bones. He looked at Silas, who was now talking quietly with Caleb, his pain seemingly eased by the presence of his son and the warmth of the fire. The fragile truce forged in the canyon and solidified on the trail felt genuine, earned through shared adversity. The cattle milled around nearby, their lowing a familiar, comforting sound. The stars blazed overhead, a silent, unchanging audience to the unfolding drama of life on the frontier. Jedediah knew that the journey was far from over, and that Doc Evans would need to be fetched for Silas. But for tonight, under the vast expanse of the desert sky, a sense of peace settled over him. He had faced a dangerous past and a challenging present, and in doing so, had found a deeper connection to the land and to the people who shared it with him. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Jedediah felt a quiet sense of hope, a belief in the enduring strength of community, even in the face of hardship. The chill of the desert night had finally given way to the pale, hopeful light of dawn. Silas Henderson, though still in considerable pain, had survived the night. Jedediah, after ensuring Silas was as comfortable as possible and that Cody and Caleb were managing the herd, had ridden swiftly to meet Doc Evans, who was now approaching the makeshift camp. The doctor, a wiry man with a perpetually tired expression, carried his medical bag with practiced efficiency. Doc Evans assessed Silas's leg with a critical eye, his movements gentle but firm. "Comminuted fracture," he declared grimly, his voice low. "Nasty break, Silas. You're lucky Jedediah got you moved. We need to get you back to civilization pronto." Using his medical kit, Doc Evans set Silas's leg as best he could in the field, splinting it with sturdy pieces of wood and cloth. Silas gritted his teeth against the pain, his face pale and beaded with sweat. Jedediah and Cody assisted the doctor, their steady hands providing support and passing instruments. Caleb watched anxiously, his young face etched with worry for his father. As the doctor worked, Jedediah found himself observing the interactions between Silas and his son. There was a deep bond between them, a quiet understanding that transcended words. He saw Silas, despite his pain, offering Caleb words of reassurance, a shared glance that spoke of a lifetime of reliance. It reminded Jedediah of his own relationship with Billy, a bond forged in love and tested by hardship. Once the leg was splinted, Doc Evans turned to Jedediah. "He needs to be moved carefully. We'll need a sturdier transport than that travois. Best to rig something up with a wagon, if you have one nearby." Jedediah shook his head. "No wagon on this drive, but I've got a spare horse. We can rig a more stable travois or perhaps fashion a litter. Cody and I can manage." Silas, his voice weak but firm, spoke up. "No, that herd, it needs to keep moving. Jedediah, you go on with your drive. Cody, you stay with me. We'll manage. Doc can get me back to Redemption Gulch when he heads back." Jedediah looked at Silas, surprised by the suggestion. "Leave the drive? Cody?" "He's proved himself," Silas insisted, his gaze steady. "He's got a good head on his shoulders. Knows the land. You trust him, don't you?" He looked pointedly at Jedediah. Jedediah considered Silas's words. He did trust Cody. The young man had shown remarkable competence and loyalty. Leaving him behind with Silas wasn't ideal, but perhaps it was the best course of action. Silas needed constant care, and Cody, with his growing experience, was capable of providing it, with Doc Evans's guidance. "All right, Silas," Jedediah said, a reluctant acceptance in his voice. "Cody stays, but you two need to be careful. And Cody," he turned to the young man, "you keep that herd moving. Don't let anything deter you, and if you run into any trouble, you handle it. Just like you handled Doyle." Cody nodded, his expression determined. "I will, Mr. Miller. You can count on me." Jedediah felt a pang of apprehension. Leaving Cody behind, entrusting him with such responsibility, was a significant step. But he also felt a quiet pride. The young man was ready. As Jedediah prepared to rejoin the main herd, he looked at Silas, their eyes meeting in a silent acknowledgement of the difficult truths they had faced, the fragility of life, the importance of trust, and the ever-present challenges of the West. The road ahead was still uncertain, but the bonds forged in adversity were proving stronger than any obstacle. Jedediah rode back towards the main herd, a complex mix of emotions swirling within him. He felt the familiar weight of responsibility for the drive, but now it was tinged with a new concern for Cody and Silas. Leaving the young man in charge, entrusting him with the significant task of managing the herd and caring for an injured neighbor, was a leap of faith. Yet he knew Cody was capable. The boy had demonstrated a quiet competence and a strong sense of duty throughout the journey. As Jedediah rejoined the main body of the herd, the familiar rhythm of the drive resumed, but with a subtle shift. The absence of Cody's steady presence was noticeable. Jedediah found himself taking on more of the responsibility, his eyes constantly scanning the flanks and the rear of the herd, anticipating potential problems. The cattle, sensing the change in routine, seemed slightly more unsettled, their movements a fraction more erratic. Jedediah worked tirelessly, pushing the herd forward with a renewed determination. He knew that Cody, despite his youth, was up to the task. He had seen the courage and resourcefulness the young man had displayed during the confrontation with Doyle and the subsequent rescue of Silas. Jedediah trusted Cody's judgment. his ability to handle the unexpected. Back at the makeshift camp near the Dry Fork, Cody settled into his new role with a quiet resolve. He ensured Silas was comfortable, changing his bandages and bringing him water. Doc Evans, having finished his work, prepared to head back towards Redemption Gulch, promising to send word once he had reached the town and made arrangements for Silas's transport. "You'll do fine, Cody," Doc Evans said, clapping him on the shoulder before mounting his own horse. "Jedediah knows he can count on you. Just keep your head, keep the herd moving, and don't take any unnecessary risks." Cody nodded, his gaze steady. "I'll do my best, Doc." Once the doctor had departed, leaving Silas and Cody with a small supply of medical provisions and a promise of future help, a new dynamic settled over their small camp. Silas, though confined to his makeshift bed, offered quiet counsel, his years of experience proving invaluable even in his injured state. He watched Cody with a keen eye, offering gentle guidance when needed, but allowing the young man the space to learn and lead. "Don't push him too hard, Cody," Silas advised one afternoon, observing Cody's efforts to keep the herd moving towards a distant water source. "Let them set their own pace when they can. Tired cattle get spooked easy." Cody listened intently, absorbing Silas's wisdom. He found himself relying on Silas's experience, asking questions and learning to read the subtle cues of both the animals and the land. He discovered a quiet satisfaction in the responsibility, a sense of purpose that had been growing within him since the beginning of the drive. He was no longer just a ranch hand, he was a vital part of the operation, entrusted with the livelihood of the Miller Ranch. He also found himself thinking of Billy back home. He remembered the boy's quiet resilience after his ordeal at the well, and he felt a sense of kinship with the young boy. He knew that Billy, like himself, was learning to face challenges, to find strength in adversity. As the days turned into a week, Cody and Silas established a steady routine. Cody would manage the herd during the day, while Silas, propped up by blankets and pillows, kept a watchful eye and offered advice. In the evenings, they would share stories around the campfire, the conversation drifting from ranching techniques to tales of the West, forging a bond born of shared isolation and mutual respect. The herd, under Cody's steady hand, continued its westward journey, a testament to the resilience of both man and beast, moving to a new, albeit temporary, rhythm. The miles stretched on, each day a testament to Jedediah's unwavering resolve. He pushed himself and the herd relentlessly, driven by the dual necessity of completing the drive and ensuring the safety of his men and livestock. The absence of Cody and Silas weighed on him, a constant, low-level hum of concern beneath the surface of his gruff pragmatism. He found himself scanning the horizon more often, his mind replaying potential scenarios, imagining Cody facing unforeseen challenges. Jedediah's leadership became more pronounced. Without Cody's steady presence, he took on a greater share of the duties, his days filled with assessing the herd, navigating the terrain, and making crucial decisions about water sources and camp locations. The other ranch hands looked to him for guidance, his quiet confidence a reassuring anchor in the vast, unpredictable landscape. "We're pushing hard, Jedediah," remarked one of the older hands, a man named Jeb, his voice carrying a note of concern. "The cattle are getting weary." "And so are we," Jedediah nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "We got to make up time, Jeb. Silas is laid up and Cody's got a lot on his plate. We push on, but we'll make camp early tonight, give everyone a chance to rest." Despite his outward stoicism, Jedediah felt the strain. The responsibility for the entire operation rested squarely on his shoulders. He missed Cody's quiet competence, his youthful energy. He missed Silas's steady presence, his years of experience. He knew he was capable, but the weight of leadership felt heavier than usual. He found himself thinking about Billy back on the ranch. He hoped the boy was doing well, helping Maria, remembering their conversations about strength and resilience. He imagined Billy looking at the stars, perhaps seeing the morning star, a symbol of hope and continuity. Jedediah clung to that image, a reminder of why he was out here, enduring the hardships of the trail. One evening, as they made camp near a wide, shallow river, Jedediah took stock of their situation. They were making good progress, but the challenges were far from over. They still had weeks of travel ahead, and the unpredictable nature of the West meant that any number of unforeseen events could arise. He sat by the campfire, the flames casting dancing shadows on his weathered face. He felt the weariness deep within him, but also a sense of quiet determination. He had faced down rustlers, navigated treacherous terrain, and dealt with injuries and setbacks. He had learned to rely on his own strength and to trust the capabilities of those around him, even when they were far away. He thought of the journey's beginning, of the tentative truce with Silas Henderson, of Cody's quiet bravery. These were not just events, they were shifts, subtle but significant, in the fabric of life on the frontier. The West was a harsh land, but it was also a land that forged connections, that demanded cooperation, that rewarded resilience. Jedediah looked up at the star-filled sky, the same sky that stretched over Cody and Silas, over Billy and Maria, back on the ranch. He found a measure of peace in that connection, a silent acknowledgement that they were all part of something larger, something enduring. The herd was his responsibility, but the connections, the bonds of community and family, were what truly sustained him. The weight of leadership was heavy, but it was a burden he carried with a quiet pride, knowing that he was not alone, even in his solitude. The drive continued, a slow, steady march towards the horizon, each step a victory, each challenge overcome a testament to the enduring spirit of the West. The final stretch of the cattle drive was a grueling yet triumphant march. Jedediah, now reunited with Cody and with Silas, safely en route to Redemption Gulch under Doc Evans's care, felt the weight of responsibility begin to lift with each mile they covered. The herd, though thinner and more weathered, was under control, their destination, the bustling stockyards, finally within reach. The journey had tested them all, pushing them to their limits, but it had also forged an unbreakable bond between Jedediah and Cody and solidified the fragile truce with the Hendersons. Jedediah watched Cody, who rode with a confidence that belied his youth. The young man had proven himself time and again, not just as a capable ranch hand, but as a steady, reliable presence. Jedediah knew that Cody's experiences on this drive had marked him, shaping him into a man ready for greater responsibilities. The memory of Cody's bravery during the confrontation with Doyle and his steady care for Silas Henderson were etched in Jedediah's mind. As they neared the outskirts of the town where the stockyards were located, the landscape began to change. The vast open prairie gave way to more settled lands, fences appearing more frequently, and the distant hum of human activity growing louder. Jedediah felt a sense of bitter-sweet anticipation. The drive was nearing its successful conclusion, but it also meant the end of this shared chapter, the scattering of the men who had weathered so much together. He found himself seeking out Cody. "Cody," he began, his voice gruff, but laced with genuine respect. "You did good work on this drive. Real good. You handled yourself like a seasoned hand. You've earned more than just your pay." Cody looked at Jedediah, surprise evident in his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. I learned a lot." "More than just learning, son," Jedediah said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You showed what you're made of. When we get back to the ranch, Indy, there'll be a place for you, a bigger place. You've got a good head for this life." Cody's face lit up with a mixture of gratitude and excitement. The offer was more than just a job. It was an acknowledgement of his growth, his potential. It was a seed of a future planted in the dusty soil of their shared experience. As they delivered the cattle, the business of the sale was efficient, albeit tiring. Jedediah oversaw the transactions, his mind already focused on the journey back, on returning to Maria and Billy, and on checking on Silas. The money from the sale was vital, a tangible reward for their arduous labor, but Jedediah knew the true value lay in the experiences gained, the bonds forged, and the lessons learned. The journey back to the ranch was quicker, fueled by the anticipation of home. Jedediah and Cody rode side by side, the conversation flowing more easily now, filled with reflections on the drive, the challenges they had overcome, and the future. Jedediah felt a sense of profound change. The West was still a harsh mistress, but he had witnessed firsthand the power of cooperation, the resilience of the human spirit, and the quiet strength that emerged when tested. The old animosities like Slick Jimmy Doyle were fading into the past, replaced by the dawning of a new era, one built on mutual respect and shared purpose. The seeds of change had been sown on the long, dusty trail, and Jedediah knew, with a quiet certainty, that they would continue to grow. The return to the Miller Ranch was a homecoming filled with a quiet joy. Maria rushed out to meet them, her face alight with relief and love, embracing Jedediah with a fierce hug. Billy, taller and seemingly more confident than when Jedediah had left, stood beside his grandmother, his blue eyes shining. He looked at his grandfather, not just as a figure of authority, but as a hero who had faced danger and returned. "Gramps!" Billy exclaimed, running to meet him. Jedediah knelt, his weariness momentarily forgotten as he swept his grandson into his arms. "You've grown, son," Jedediah murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Been helping Grandma?" Billy nodded enthusiastically. "Every day, and Cody showed me how to mend fences proper." Jedediah glanced at Cody, a warm smile spreading across his face. The young man had not only proven himself on the drive, but had also stepped into a mentoring role for Billy, a responsibility he had embraced with dedication. The ranch felt different. It was the same weathered farmhouse, the same sprawling landscape, but a subtle shift had occurred. Maria's quiet strength, Billy's growing confidence, and Cody's newfound maturity were palpable. Jedediah felt a deep sense of contentment, a grounding he hadn't realized he'd been missing. News from Redemption Gulch had preceded them. Sheriff Brody had secured a conviction against Slick Jimmy Doyle and his men, a testament to Jedediah and Cody's efforts. Doyle, a menace to the community for too long, was finally off the streets. Jedediah felt a sense of closure, a satisfaction in knowing that justice, however imperfect, had been served. The encounter had been dangerous, but it had ultimately strengthened his resolve and highlighted the importance of standing up against injustice. Silas Henderson, his leg healing well under Doc Evans's care, had sent word. He expressed his profound gratitude to both Jedediah and Cody and reiterated his offer of continued cooperation. The tentative truce forged during the drive had blossomed into a genuine partnership. Jedediah knew that the Hendersons, once rivals, were now trusted neighbors, their shared experiences having bridged the chasm of old grudges. Jedediah sat with Maria by the fireplace that evening, the lamplight casting a warm glow. He recounted the events of the drive, the dangers they had faced, the successes they had achieved. He spoke of Cody's bravery, of Silas's resilience, and of the quiet strength he had found within himself. "It wasn't just about the cattle, Maria," Jedediah said, his gaze thoughtful. "It was about finding our way, facing what needed facing." He looked at Billy, who was now engrossed in a book by the firelight, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We all faced something, didn't we? Billy with that well, Cody on the trail, Silas with his injury, even me with Doyle." Maria nodded, her hand resting on Jedediah's. "We did, and we came through it, stronger." She looked at Billy, a soft smile on her face. "He's growing up so fast, Jedediah. He's learning what it means to be brave." Jedediah watched his grandson, a profound sense of peace settling over him. The journey had been long, the challenges significant, but they had all returned home, not just with cattle, but with something far more valuable, a deeper understanding of themselves, of each other, and of the enduring power of family and community. The West was still a land of challenges, but for the Millers the future looked brighter, grounded in the hard-won lessons of the past. The dust of the cattle drive had settled, and a semblance of normalcy had returned to the Miller ranch. Yet nothing was quite the same. The echoes of their journey resonated in the everyday routines, subtly reshaping the lives of those who called this land home. Jedediah, though still carrying the quiet authority of a seasoned rancher, seemed more open, his gaze often lingering on his grandson with a newfound appreciation. Maria's quiet strength was now tinged with a vibrant relief, her laughter more frequent, her presence a warm beacon. Cody, no longer just a ranch hand, had become an integral part of the Miller family, his future on the ranch secured, his mentorship of Billy, a testament to the bonds forged on the trail. Billy, transformed by his harrowing experience at the well and his grandfather's subsequent journey, carried himself with a quiet confidence. The nightmares had faded, replaced by a thoughtful curiosity about the world around him. He still possessed a spark of youthful energy, but it was now tempered with a deeper understanding of consequence and a growing appreciation for the safety and love that surrounded him. The old well, once a source of terrifying fascination, now stood as a silent monument to a past ordeal, a reminder of lessons learned. Jedediah had, with Billy's hesitant consent, begun the slow process of filling it in, a symbolic act of sealing away the danger and embracing the light. One crisp autumn afternoon, Jedediah found Billy sitting near the now filled-in depression where the well once stood. The land around it was slowly being reclaimed by grass and wildflowers. Billy was sketching in his worn notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What you drawing, son?" Jedediah asked, sitting beside him. Billy looked up, a shy smile on his face. "The stars, Gramps, like you said, the morning star." He turned the notebook, revealing a detailed sketch of Venus hanging low on the horizon, surrounded by a scattering of faint stars. Jedediah studied the drawing, a warmth spreading through his chest. It was more than just a sketch. It was a symbol of resilience, of hope, of the light that always returns after the darkest night. "That's mighty fine work, Billy. You've got a good eye." He remembered his words to Billy weeks ago, about holding on to hope, about looking for the morning star. Seeing that symbol captured in his grandson's drawing filled him with a profound sense of peace. The boy had not only survived his ordeal, but had found a way to process it, to find meaning in it. Their conversation turned to the future. Jedediah spoke of the ranch, of the need for steady hands and good judgment. He looked at Cody, who was nearby, overseeing the repair of a section of fence. "Cody's going to be with us for the long haul," Jedediah said, his voice filled with conviction. "He's got the grit. And Billy," he turned back to his grandson, "you keep learning, keep asking questions. This land's got a lot to teach." The relationship with the Hendersons had also solidified. Silas, now walking with a slight limp but his spirit undimmed, had become a true partner. Their ranches, once separated by rivalry, were now connected by a shared history and a mutual respect. They exchanged resources, shared knowledge, and looked out for each other's families, a testament to the power of overcoming past conflicts. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the familiar landscape, Jedediah felt a deep sense of gratitude. The year had brought immense challenges, loss, fear, danger, but it had also brought growth, healing, and a strengthening of the bonds that truly mattered. The whispering well was silenced, but the lessons it had taught, about courage, about forgiveness, about the enduring power of hope, would resonate on the Miller Ranch for generations to come. The light, like the morning star, had returned, brighter and more steadfast than ever, illuminating a path forward into a future built on resilience and unwavering love.